Great. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Gail Schwartz with the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining us for our topic today, funding affordable housing nationally and in Pennsylvania. The Housing Alliance is a statewide housing coalition working to increase access to safe, decent, and affordable homes for all Pennsylvanians. Just to let you know, all attendees are going to be on mute. We are going to be recording today's session. And while we are still waiting for a couple more folks to come into the room, I do want to let you know that we are always looking for new members of our coalition. If you aren't a member, we do ask that you consider joining. You can visit our website to join as a member, or you can contact us at info@housingalliancepa.org for more information. So today's webinar is going to run approximately 60 minutes, including question and answer. If you want to ask the presenters a question, please use the Q&A function. And then please use the chat feature if you need to ask any sort of logistical questions of Housing Alliance staff. We will be emailing a recording of today's webinar after the presentation, along with any materials associated, and it will probably go out within later this week or early next week. So before we get started, I do want to share with you all some upcoming events. Our next event is going to be a virtual forum creating a statewide eviction prevention strategy. We will be hearing from state and local leaders to talk about 5 strategies to prevent evictions. We are also going to be joined by Peggy Bailey, Senior Advisor on Rental Assistance from HUD. So you can register for this event on our website. Just look for the events page. So we hope that you will all join us for that event. And of course, please save the date for our 17th annual Homes Within Reach conference. As the Commonwealth comes back strong from 2020, the Housing Alliance will be holding its 17th annual Homes Within Reach conference in Hershey, Pennsylvania, December 1st through the 3rd. And we are working to ensure all Pennsylvanians are moving on the road from surviving to thriving. Just to let you all know, the conference has moved to the Hershey Lodge in Hershey, Pennsylvania for a more spacious setting. It is our hope that you will have a sweet experience. We, along with the Hershey Lodge, will adhere to all CDC and state guidelines in effect at the time of the conference. And lastly, we just want to share some resources that you can look at after today's webinar that will reinforce some of the topics that we are talking about today. If you want to learn more about the state of affordable housing in your county, we strongly encourage you to take a look at your county fact sheet on the Housing Alliance resources page. And then you can also find our 2021 policy agenda on our website as well. We'll be sure to send out links to all of these resources after today's webinar. Now, I want to introduce our speakers. First, we have Emily Cadik from the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Coalition, and then we will also hear from our own Brian Fuss from the Housing Alliance. So Emily, I pass it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here today. I'm just going to try to pull up my slides as seamlessly as possible here. Is everyone able to see my slides? All right. Assume you'll let me know if that's not the case. Anyways, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. We really appreciate everything that the Housing Alliance is doing with the Pennsylvania Congressional Delegation and all the support that you all have built for affordable housing in your state. So just want to thank you all for having both done all of this important work and also in such a state that is very important for our advocacy efforts. So again, I'm Emily Cadik. I'm with the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Coalition. we're a group of about 200 organizations and businesses that have collectively financed or developed well over half of all affordable housing in the US. So when we go to Congress and say we've got the consensus of the coalition, it's very powerful. And we've actually just been spending the last week doing a virtual fly-in where we've been able to meet with members from all across the country. And it's always encouraging, even when we can't be on the Hill in person, to hear just how much broad bipartisan support for the housing credit that there continues to be, if not even more so. And I think everyone's really realized, especially in the past year, that affordable housing is critical and that we need so much more of it if we're going to recover from this crisis. So I will be talking today about, as our name would suggest, since we focus on the housing credit, really focusing there and on the exciting new legislation to expand and strengthen the program, but also just some of the other housing pieces that are either have passed or are coming together as part of infrastructure conversations in this Congress. So get started. Just figure out how to advance. There we go. So I wanted to start with some of the, just kind of setting the stage here. I know you all are very familiar with a lot of what's happened already over the past few months and played a large role in helping to get it across the finish line. But it's important to just remember, as we're talking about what's still coming up on the pike this year, that we've already had some incredible wins for affordable housing, the likes of which are typically very few and far between. So at the end of last year, we got a provision across the finish line that we've been working on for more than 3 years, which was getting a permanent minimum 4% housing credit rate, which is already making so many more developments possible with the 4% side of the program that just weren't financially feasible before. There was the first, or I guess an installment of emergency rental assistance, not the first, but the first of these two kind of sets of them in the past few months. So there was the $25 billion authorized then. There was also a disaster housing credit allocation that went to about a dozen states and amounted to another more than $1 billion for the program. And then we got a full year of funding for HUD programs at very strong levels. So then we fast forward a few months to the American Rescue Plan, where we got another $40 billion in housing resources. So the next installment of emergency rental assistance, more than $20 billion there, plus $5 billion for vouchers, $5 billion for homelessness funding. So we've already seen a lot of this support for affordable housing translate into some very needed resources. But what's also exciting is that it's not over yet, and infrastructure talks are happening now. And as you've all seen, affordable housing is poised to be a very big part of infrastructure legislation. And we'll talk more about how that may actually come together, but our work is definitely not done. And so we are excited about the possibility and working hard right now to lay the groundwork for that. So, sorry, there's a lag with the slides here. There we go. So I wanted to just spend a minute longer talking about kind of what the 4% rate means and where that means we go from here. So we had estimates that it was going to help finance another 130,000 affordable homes than would otherwise be possible over the next decade. And I'm sure you all are starting to see some of those examples of new homes coming together already. But what we're also finding is, because the 4% rate is more successful and it's now being more widely used, that means that we need more private activity bond resources, and we need them pretty quickly. So we had already seen prior to the pandemic, prior to the 4% rate being enacted, that there were close to a dozen states that were already bond cap constrained. But now there are states that weren't even close that are suddenly seeing all of these 4% deals getting done, and now they're hitting up on the bond cap limit. So it's something we've been hearing about from your counterparts in New York and California, Washington State, Massachusetts for a while, but it's really becoming more of a national issue that we need more access to those private activity bonds that help you get or that are required to get the 4% credit. So that is why this year we have a new proposal that we're advocating for, which is to lower the 50% bond financing threshold of the private activity bond financing needed in order to get those 4% credits. So as you all know, there's nothing magic about the 50% test. It was originally 70%, and then Congress lowered it, and we're proposing they lower it further still. There's also nothing magic about the 25% level that we're proposing, but it would at least allow states to basically do twice the 4% deals with half the private activity bonds, or with the same amount of private activity bonds. So it's a way to essentially double the capacity on the 4% side without necessarily getting a new infusion of private activity bonds. I would not rule out also getting a new infusion of private activity bonds, but this is a way that we can achieve those goals while also building an efficiency into the program, since most developments don't really want or need that 50% bond financing. So getting that included in the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act was definitely a lift. It's not the most elegant proposal to explain, but we were able to add it this year, and we just saw the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act reintroduced just over a month ago, and we're really excited about this new version of it. So I'll give the quick overview. I know a lot of you are very familiar with it since it's been introduced every Congress since 2016, but there are some key changes this year. But the basics are still the same, which is it's the comprehensive legislation to expand and strengthen the low-income housing tax credit. The expansion comes in two main ways, both a 50% allocation increase, which is what we've been advocating for since the beginning. We did get a piece of that done a few years ago in 2018. We got the first expansion of the program in a decade with the 12.5% cap increase that was effective for 4 years. That's expiring at the end of this year, but we're proposing to kind of bake that into the baseline and increase 50% on top of that. The other new way that we're essentially proposing to expand the program is this proposal to lower the 50% test. So it's basically a 50% expansion on the 4% side as well. And then there's the usual 24 or so other provisions we've been advocating for a while. That includes the basis boost for properties serving extremely low income tenants, basis boosts for rural and native communities, a lot of streamlining and preservation provisions. Definitely won't run through them all today, but the basics of the legislation are the same. The new piece this year, the major new piece this year, is the proposal to lower the 50% test. So we also have some new lead sponsors this year, in addition to the new provisions in the bill. Fortunately, we have several who are champions of affordable housing that are returning to lead this effort. So over on the Senate side, we've still got Maria Cantwell and Todd Young leading the effort. Senator Ron Wyden is the second Democratic co-lead, which is extremely significant since he just became the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee in January. So having the chairman, who's going to be writing the tax piece of the infrastructure bill, as a lead sponsor on this legislation certainly is something we're very excited about. And then replacing Johnny Isaacson, who was our second lead Republican, he retired. And so Rob Portman is going to be stepping in. He's of course retiring himself, but not till the end of this Congress. So he's going to be leading, helping to lead the effort in the Senate. And then over on the House side, we've got Representative Susan DelBene, who picked up the lead sponsor role on this bill a couple years ago. And Jackie Walorski is moving into the lead Republican spot. Don Beyer from Virginia is the second lead Democrat. And then we have a new lead Republican to replace Kenny Marchant, who retired. And that's Brad Wenstrup from Ohio. So as you can see, Ohio is really stepping up on affordable housing this year and continuing a pretty strong legacy of bipartisan support in that state for affordable housing issues. So we're looking forward to having this new set of sponsors on the bill and being able to show that once again, this is a very bipartisan piece of legislation, especially with so many different housing proposals out there right now. This level of support that we already have right out of the gate is pretty significant. And wanted to talk about the Pennsylvania delegation support, where you all, again, have just done a great job building support for this bill in the past. So here's a list of who signed on to the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act in the last Congress. So unfortunately, I've been trying with Senator Toomey for a while, and that one's been tough, but Senator Casey did sign on, along with, as you can see, about a dozen members of your House delegation. Two of them have already signed back on and are officially listed in the congressional record. If you look at the sponsors of the bill, which is 2573, so Brian Fitzpatrick and Dwight Evans are both on. There's also one other member who has reached out to sign on, hasn't been added yet officially, and that's Michael Doyle. And the way that our congressional leads are adding co-sponsors is doing what they've done in the past, which is only adding Democrats when there's a corresponding Republican, or trying to keep it at least roughly balanced, because you don't want to see what is very possible with a bill like this, where you end up with 50 Democrats on it and 10 Republicans, and it can serve as a deterrent to getting more Republicans on. So Congressman Doyle will be waiting until we get a few more Republicans before he's added, but it's great to have Representatives Fitzpatrick and Evans on. Also wanted to flag that we'd like to get all of these members back on who signed on before, especially the ones who are on key committees. So you've got Mike Kelly and Lloyd Smucker on the Ways and Means Committee, signed on in the past. Those would be my top priorities I would recommend to get back on, and I know the Housing Alliance is working on them. Mary Gay Scanlon's also on Financial Services Committee, and since they do so much with housing, even though it's not the committee with jurisdiction over the housing credit, it would be great to get any members of that committee on as well. And then I also just wanted to flag that also, since Congressman Boyle is on the Ways and Means Committee, he didn't sign on in the last Congress, but that's a member we'd like to get on as well if we can get his support. So thanks for all the work you guys have clearly already done, and hope that you all keep at it. I mean, with infrastructure talks happening right now, we're really trying to add these members back on as soon as possible. I had a statistic on a couple slides ago showing that we had more than half of the House of Representatives signed on to this bill and more than 40 senators in the last Congress. And it was really impressive because we hit those numbers in about 6 months, but we don't necessarily even have 6 months right now because they're trying to wrap up infrastructure before the end of September. So now's the time to get members on and just appreciate any help with the outreach here. So I also wanted to just talk a little bit about what the impact of the bill would be this year, which is much higher than in years past because of these some of the new provisions. So wanted to kind of recap quickly the key main provisions that would actually increase resources. So some of the provisions in the bill would just make the program stronger, more effective, but don't actually have as much of an impact in terms of production. But the main ones that do the production impacts are the 50% allocation increase, the new proposal to lower the 50% test, and then the various basis boosts that I mentioned. So all told, that would create more than 2 million more affordable homes over the next decade, which is quadrupling the impact this bill would have had from prior years. So thank you to our friends at Novogradac and Company for coming up with these estimates, which are really kind of eye-popping. So we already know that the 50% allocation increase in the credit would lead to another 300,000 or so affordable homes. But the proposal to lower the 50% test has a whopping 1.5 million homes that would be created over the next 10 years, which is staggering. And that's because of all of these states that are bond cap constrained and would essentially be able to double production on the 4% side as well. And then definitely don't want to discount the basis boost provisions, which also would lead to more than 200,000 more affordable homes over the next decade. So definitely, I think this increased impact is appropriate for the moment we're in with the increased need that's arisen over the past year. We are starting to build bipartisan support up already, even though with a bigger impact carries a bigger cost, but we haven't found that to be at this point a deterrent to getting bipartisan support. And especially when you consider that the likeliest legislative vehicle for this is as part of infrastructure legislation. If the goal is to not just provide homes, but also stimulate the economy, having this impact would really help create all the jobs and the neighborhood impacts that affordable housing development provides. So let's talk about what might actually happen with infrastructure legislation. We are very optimistic that there will be quite a lot in infrastructure on affordable housing, and specifically the housing credit. So we already saw the Biden administration has come out with some initial proposals on their American Jobs Plan, and that included a call for a market increase in the resources available through the low-income housing tax credit. As I'm sure you all have seen quite a bit for some other housing programs as well, and I'll run through that in a minute. But on the housing credit specifically, it's not just support from the administration, but we've seen support from Congress as well. Not only the fact that so many members are signing on or have signed on to the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, but we saw last summer when the House passed their infrastructure bill, the Moving Forward Act, there are about a dozen housing credit provisions, including increasing the allocation, including lowering the 50% test. So that really showed that really the main resource provisions from the AHCIA, the ones that would have that impact of 2 million homes over the next decade, all made it into the infrastructure bill once already. And that is what the House is going to be using as a starting point as they take the pen on infrastructure legislation. And then of course, when it heads over to the Senate, we've got one of our lead sponsors, Senator Wyden, who has said many times, and his staff has said many times, that they're prepared to go to the mat for affordable housing and infrastructure. So it's exciting to hear. That said, the negotiations are going to take a while. So, when the Biden administration and the new Congress came in, we were facing a deadline of about 6 weeks before a bunch of benefits were going to expire. And so the negotiations, bipartisan negotiations, ended about a few days into that when Democrats pretty much said we got to cut Republicans loose and pass this bill through budget reconciliation, where they can do the party line vote with a simple majority, that they needed to get that done by middle of March, and they did. This time with infrastructure, there's no looming deadline in the immediate future. And I think that Democrats and the Biden administration in particular are also sensitive to the criticism of not attempting to engage in a bipartisan fashion. So I would expect that there is going to be more of a drawn out process of bipartisan negotiations, even if it seems like the Republican counteroffer we're seeing on infrastructure is just a fraction of what the Democrats are calling for. And I think many of us, myself included, are skeptical about whether anything bipartisan is possible on infrastructure. I think that they're at least going to give it a little while before Democrats may still ultimately cut the Republicans loose and do budget reconciliation. But we're not going to know that this week or next week. It's probably going to take a few weeks. Speaker Pelosi had said she wanted to pass an infrastructure bill before the July 4th recess, which is just a few weeks away at this point. We'll see if that's possible. A lot of people are expecting it may slip into the summer. The only real deadline that there is the end of September, where there's both the need to pass spending bill, but also there's a surface transportation reauthorization that's going to be necessary. So that's something that could serve as a vehicle for all or part of some infrastructure legislation. So it's really going to be fluid for a while. There's going to be a lot of offers and counteroffers. There's going to be a lot of hearings. We saw one yesterday where one of our board members, who I'm sure you all know well, Mike Novogradac, author of the impact estimates on this bill, testified with the Ways and Means Committee, and they're clearly very focused on what role community development tax credits like the housing credit and others can play in infrastructure. So really the thing to do right now is just keep building support for affordable housing, because the ultimate, as with every kind of legislative push, the ultimate cost of the package, whether it's budget reconciliation or not, all of that is kind of beyond all of our control. But what we can control is how well positioned the affordable housing priorities are to be included in whatever does move. So that is why we are, like a broken record, continuing to ask for help getting co-sponsors back on the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. But as for some of the other affordable housing components of the infrastructure proposal, the American Jobs Plan is proposing $2.25 trillion total. This is for the jobs piece of the plan, not what they're calling the family investments, which are some of the other things like child tax credit, et cetera. But there's quite a bit in here for affordable housing, as you've all seen. So, more than $200 billion for affordable housing with a focus on energy efficiency. They are calling to enact the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, which would help build single family homes for in distressed communities. A lot of focus on eliminating exclusionary zoning and harmful land use policies, big investment in public housing, And then again, some more energy efficient upgrades. Of course, they have to figure out how to pay for this. And that's one of the reasons that bipartisan compromise seems unlikely, because the main way the Democrats are proposing to do it is by increasing the corporate tax rate from the current 21% to maybe 25. There's been talks of 28, though a lot of people think that that's probably too high and unlikely. But increasing the corporate rate is a non-starter for Republicans, and that is the main way that the Democrats are seeking to pay for this. So we'll see what they come up with over the next few months, but that's at least what the kind of starting point is for negotiations on infrastructure. I also just wanted to flag again just who's kind of going to be governing these pieces on affordable housing in Congress. So we've got Ron Wyden, who is one of the lead sponsors on the AHCA. He's also going to be coming out soon with something called the DASH Act, which is the Decent, Affordable, and Safe Housing Act, I believe, if I'm getting the acronym right. But what's important to know about it is not what the letters stand for that they came up with, but the fact that he's going to be coming out with an extremely sweeping housing bill that's going to include pieces on the low-income housing tax credit, a middle-income tax credit, which he's been proposing for many years, a renter's tax credit. There could be other pieces as well. I mean, he basically wants to not just make a dent in the affordable housing crisis, but actually solve it. And so you're going to see some legislation soon from the chairman that would be extremely sweeping and ambitious in nature. So something to keep an eye out for. Also significant that we've got Mike Crapo as the lead Republican and not Chuck Grassley on the Finance Committee anymore, because Senator Grassley was a little skeptical of the housing credit, maybe not an opponent, but I think we were all kind of wondering, you know, what GAO report he may request next. Senator Crapo is a big fan of the housing credit, and to the extent there are bipartisan compromises, will be helpful to have him be part of it. Over on the House side, we've got a huge champion in Richie Neal, who was the original lead of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. And then Kevin Brady, not the biggest fan of affordable housing, probably never will be, but he is retiring at the end of this term. So we will see who replaces him there. But he's, especially in the House, the Republicans are just not really involved in any talks on infrastructure. So fortunately, his lack of support is not really going to impact us at this point, most likely. So I will stop there and see what questions you all have. I know we ran through a lot. And actually, I just realized maybe one other thing I wanted to flag, since it's kind of some late breaking news before I see what questions there are, is just one of the major issues we'd been watching out for with the administration was Community Reinvestment Act reform, since CRA is a major driver, the major driver of investment in affordable housing, drives about 75% of it. So we were very concerned about the rule that came out under the Trump administration last year from the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency that would have really weakened the incentive that CRA currently provides for the housing credit. We weren't really expecting the Biden administration to implement that rule anymore, but we got the first real concrete news to that effect yesterday. The new acting controller of the currency just put out a statement saying they're not going to implement that rule. So we're back to the drawing board on CRA. Hopefully we'll see a joint rule with all three regulators. The Federal Reserve has their proposal. Maybe they'll work with the OCC and the FDIC now to come up with something together. But either way, I think we can all take some comfort in knowing the rule that was finalized last year is not going to come to pass. So wanted to flag that, but now I will really open it up for questions. So let's see what's in the chat here. Okay, so I see one question is, how are they defining affordable? So that's a good question. There's no real definition of affordable housing that was included in the Biden proposal. And we were wondering about that as well when we first saw the outline of the American Jobs Plan, because it said, more than $200 billion for affordable housing. We're saying, well, does that mean light tech? Does it mean something else? So that's why we were very glad when they came out with the more specifics on the tax side of the plan. And that's when they called for a market increase in the low-income housing tax credit. So we still haven't seen details on whether when the Biden administration says affordable housing, is that all LIHTC? Is it mostly LIHTC and something else? So that's something that, we don't know if the Biden administration is going to come out with more details or they're going to let Congress figure it out. But we know, at least in Congress, we have a lot of members who are going to be writing this legislation who think affordable housing means LIHTC. So a very good question here. So let me see what other questions are here. See that there's one on rent control pricing regulations. I think there's a question there though. Let's see. What are your thoughts on the negative impact to the 9% tax credit, interest, and pricing due to the 4% fix? So good question. I get a lot of questions about pricing now for good reason, since it has declined a little bit lately. There's a lot of factors that could impact housing credit pricing this year going forward. So one of them is, further expansion of the credit. So obviously, if there's more credits, that could apply some pressure in one direction. On the other hand, if the way that a further expansion is paid for is by increasing the corporate tax rate from 21 to 25 or even higher percent, that could really affect pricing in the other direction. And then, as I just mentioned, with CRA reform, if something actually happens this year or next, that could have an impact on pricing as well. So it's difficult to make predictions, and I certainly don't want to be in the business of doing that. But there are a lot of factors to watch out for that could push pricing in each direction this year. So we are certainly sensitive as we're advocating for some of these changes. So for example, on the 50% cap increase, there's going to be a phase in. It's not all going to come in overnight if we are able to get it, to make sure that we have time to ramp up the investor market. And we've let our congressional champions know that, before we anything hits the floor and goes to the president's desk, let's kind of retain the option to check in and make sure, do we need to change anything on an effective date or things like that, to make sure that if we are able to get some of these changes, that they're really going to have the positive impact we want them to. So very good question, something that we and our congressional leads are very much talking about, and are optimistic that at the end of this year, we're going to not only have more resources, but also in a pricing environment that'll be able to sustain it well. All right, I see a question about Fannie and Freddie. I may answer that one offline. I think that might be it on questions, unless Brian, Gail, do you see any others I'm missing? All right, well then, thanks very much. Feel free to reach out if anyone thinks of anything else. And it's great to be here. And again, thank you for all the work you're doing. So Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Emily. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to have a discussion about some of our state and federal legislative policy initiatives for this year. Let me just start by saying I have up on the screen really about all the different buckets of work that we're doing in the state and also federally. It's an exciting time in the federal government right now, because of so much resources that are going to some of the things that we are trying to work on. And so it's really exciting to hear about the different federal things that are going on. We are working with Emily's group, and we're also working with the National Low Income Housing Coalition to talk with our legislators, our federal delegation, and talk to them about the importance of affordable housing, also ending housing homelessness, making sure that there's money there for homeowners, also in preventing evictions. So we are working with our federal delegation on this. I will say we had a meeting just the other day with Representative Fitzpatrick's staffer, and they are looking like they would like to put in a bill to extend the Consolidated Act, extend the reallocation deadline. So we might have more information on that later. We're trying to just kind of figure out how do we go about that. But they're looking for co-sponsors, and so we probably will be tagging everyone and asking them to call their representatives to get co-sponsors for that. But again, it's a really exciting time. I can never divorce legislative from advocacy. And so we are going to be doing a lot of advocacy again this year. So for on the state side, from January to June, we have a few items that we're pushing. And then in June, we'll come out with the second half of our legislative agenda. But the first thing we're doing, and we're doing it right now, is we are trying to get the state portion of the federal rental assistance program to extend the deadlines and also to remove the caps on the administrative fees. So this is the Act 1 of 2021. It put an administrative fee and a case management fee cap of 9.09%. We have talked to our folks throughout the Commonwealth, and they're having a really hard time keeping up with the demand and being able to expeditiously get the applications done. So we are currently working with different legislators to remove that cap and to also say that the American Rescue Plan actually extended the dates for reallocation, and that we need to do that on the state side too. In tandem with that, we are working to get what we call ERAP 2.0 up and running. Every federal dollars needs some legislation to it, and so ERAP 2.0, which is coming from the American Rescue Plan, we would like that to mirror the federal requirements. And the basic part of that is that the cap for administrative fees in ARP is 15%, and then 10% for case management fees, to make sure that the legislation at the state level really looks like the legislation on the federal level. And so we will be, we're currently in discussions with several of our state legislators about the importance of not actually having those caps and mirroring the federal regulations. The other piece in preventing evictions, we are looking to do some improved data on eviction filings. And we're still thinking through about exactly what this looks like. As you know, if you work in eviction prevention, the data is kind of all over the place. And so we would like to figure out how do we improve this data so that every one of us has data at our hands, so that we can go to legislators and make our cases. Under the affordable housing development, we are currently trying to secure the $10 million of tax credits. So Act 107 of 2020 actually created a framework for the state housing tax credit, which was fantastic, but it was not funded with the $10 million in tax credits. So this year we are working on getting those $10 million in tax credits. At this particular point, we believe that it's going to be an amendment or a standalone bill to get support for this. Right now we are certainly looking at building support for across the Commonwealth with representatives and senators to fund this tax credit. It's vitally important so that we have more money that we can help develop some of the affordable housing, which I think is really important concerning everything going on federally and all the money that is possibly coming down that Emily just talked about. With this $10 million, it will just close deals faster, and it will also really help developers develop much more affordable housing. And then, of course, we always try to tackle blight as much as possible. And so there are 4 bills that are currently that we're looking at. HB 160, which basically is providing municipalities' ability to deny permits to LLCs if they have tax liabilities or if they're not paying their taxes. That right now is in Urban Affairs. We are hoping that it will soon have a hearing and voted out of committee. We would like to see that pass before June. Also, we are looking at the reporting delinquent properties tax sales. So that's 264. That's basically creating a, if you will, a database of anybody who has delinquent properties, and then that they aren't able to buy some of the properties. And so that's currently in the Senate Urban Affairs. We're expecting that bill to move soon, now that the housing, now that the budget hearings are kind of concluded and they're going into budget season. House Bill 581, which really encourages affordable housing through tax abatements and exemptions. We are looking at that. That's in House Appropriations, and really kind of looking to move that along. And then finally, we're looking at House Bill 610, which is providing land banks with environmental protection. Right now, we have a meeting scheduled on 5/25 in Urban Affairs, and we're hoping a really swift and easy and vote for this out of committee and onto the floor and then over to the other chamber. We are looking at a lot of other state legislation. If you want to know more, you can always get in touch with me. There's a first home buyers savings account, and we are looking at that. We have sent a letter of support for that. But for June, this is what we've been working on. We're going into what I call an exciting time because it's budget season. And so now is the time to really advocate for all of our priorities and to say that we really care about these issues. And so with that, there's going to be a lot of chances for advocacy. So we are having a Housing Solutions Week. It is May 28th to June 4th. And the idea is that we are going to go to representatives' offices and into different communities, and we're going to advocate for, of course, all of our all the priorities that we have. So we're going to go into, of course, it's on the screen here. So if you are part of actually any of those counties, we would love to hear from you. You know, we're doing 2 things. Again, in the morning, we're going to meet with the representatives at district offices and tell them exactly what we need. And then in the afternoon, we're going to meet with some of our providers and some of our folks in the community, and just talk to them about how's it going, issues they see, how we can be of assistance, and really just do listening and hoping that we can move legislation along. June 10th, as you just heard, there will be an eviction forum. And then some action alerts. We are going to be sending out several action alerts. We're working on one action alert at this particular point around Senator Toomey, asking him to negotiate with the Democratic caucus in the American Jobs Bill. but to also make sure that in that bill that there are the priorities that we want to see regarding housing, and making that a real core component of the American Jobs Bill, infrastructure bill. So that's what we've been doing for the last several months. And we really thank everyone who's calling their senators and their representatives in the federal delegation. Expect that we are certainly going to be asking more and hoping that you're going to get more involved. We are starting regional policy councils, and so in the north, south, east, and west, and we have a policy council at the Alliance that are really kind of going to help us with our policy ask and help us get a groundswell of support for the initiative. So if you're interested in contacting us and being part of some of our amazing initiatives, my email address is up there. Please email me. I try to get back to people as quickly as possible. And we're just looking forward to a good end of the session, and of course, getting the ERAP 2.0 up and running, removing the caps on Act 1 or ERAP 1.0, and then the state housing tax credit, and getting all our blight bills out. So with that, I will end, and thank you very much. If you have questions, I am here to take questions, and I think I will turn it back over to my colleague, Gail.
Hi, everyone. It looks like we do have a few questions in the chat, or I'm sorry, in the Q&A box. So for both of our panelists, what are your thoughts on tax credits versus, or in addition to, local township or municipality ordinances that put significant additional costs on developers or on developments overall?
Brian, I'll let you take that one.
I think that's a great question. I don't have the answer for you, Jim, but I will research it and get back to you. I know that from the state side, we've just been thinking about the tax credits. So I will have to go back and just kind of look at that, because I don't want to give you wrong information. I will say, putting additional costs on developers, I don't think works, because it certainly puts a burden on them to get affordable housing out into the community. And part of the tax credits, at least on the state side, is actually getting those housing units onto the market faster, which I think we can all agree that we need a lot more affordable housing and decent housing, especially in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, and I definitely don't want to, speak to any of the kind of state and local issues there, but from the federal perspective, it's both needing more tax credits and also trying to reduce some of the barriers that's driving up costs or preventing developments from moving forward. I touched briefly on it, but it is something that the American Jobs Plan does propose, is to try to eliminate some of those local policies. Now, of course, there's a lot of legal and all sorts of issues involved in, what is the federal government's role in influencing local policies, but it's something that I think everyone is very aware of, that, unfortunately, I think there are some, say, members of Congress who think if you reduce some of these barriers, that's all you need to do to solve the affordable housing crisis. And I think we all know that's not the case, but there is bipartisan agreement on the need to change some of these. So I think we'll see a lot more of that this year as well.
Okay, and we have another question. This one's for Brian specifically. Can you share with the folks more about the regional policy councils and what those will entail?
Certainly. So right now we are doing a lot of civic engagement with communities across the Commonwealth. And it's for listen, and we're listening and then hopefully acting on housing and health. And so that's in partnership with FAN. So the regional policy councils are done by region, and we have each of the counties in a particular region. Basically, these regional policy councils are going to meet about once a month. And then we're going to talk about what's from our research that we did in each county. What are some of the major barriers that people are seeing in their counties, and then working on solutions to mitigate some of those barriers. So for instance, some of the things that we're hearing in the different communities, we heard it in Lackawanna and Luzerne County yesterday, was the lack of real affordable housing, right? And so we are trying to get people involved in the advocacy part of doing the policy ask initiative. So it will be helping us figure out what's the best way to advocate, and also looking at the local level to see what we can do on the local level to help push policies that will actually mitigate some of the barriers we have. So we're expecting that it's about, we'll have a call, and then we will also work up and do some what we call engagement activities. Now that's broadly defined, I know, but it could be anywhere from going and testifying at a budget hearing to going to district offices and talking to our representatives and senators and saying this is what we need. So it's pretty open right now, and we really want these councils to be driven by the people on the councils and the people in the communities, and not so much the Housing Alliance.
Excellent, excellent. And then there's one last question. How does new developers assess tax credits for affordable housing?
Yeah, so it's, I'll let you, if you want to chime in about anything about the state's process, but it's unfortunate, the low-income housing tax credit is unfortunately not available to all of the projects that are eligible to receive it. So it's through a competitive process that the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency administers. So I'm sure they have lots of great information on their website, but it's something where you would assemble the application and go through that process. It's unfortunately not something you can just say, I've got something that qualifies and now I'm ready for my credits. And that's part of why we're pushing for the expansion. But I don't know if Gail or Brian, you had anything you wanted to add on that?
No, that sounds about right. Yep. And then we have one follow-up question in regards to the policy councils. Is there room at the council table for folks who advocate for affordable housing for those individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities?
So we're the Housing Alliance, and we have room for everybody. And so that is absolutely yes. And again, just send me an email and we can talk about it and get a little more specific. Again, we're also looking to go into communities and talk more with folks in communities. So if that's something you're interested in us talking to either clients or staff members, we would love to do that. And I will make a pitch again for the Housing Solutions Week.
Great. And then we have one last question, which is talking about the need for more deep subsidy, right? What are your views concerning the need for more public housing development rather than low-income housing tax credits? Since public housing is stable, it is based off of income, in contrast to the low-income housing tax credit, which is a fixed rent below market.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't think of it as, you know, public housing instead of low-income housing tax credit. I would say we need both. We've got 11 million affordable home shortage that we need to fill, and I think if we filled it with either type of housing or just Section 8, we wouldn't have as good outcomes as if we had a combination of all of the different types. One thing that's exciting about the prospect of infrastructure legislation is, whereas I think those of us who advocate for affordable housing often have to pick our one or two things, and we're kind of nibbling around the edges and these very narrow vehicles, and really have to kind of limit our asks. I think, as you saw from the American Jobs Plan proposal, there's talk of $40 billion for public housing and $200 billion for affordable housing, and a lot of Section 8. So I think it's very positive that we don't probably just have to pick one thing, and we'll hopefully be able to make a much more meaningful dent in that shortage this year by having all of the tools available to us, because public housing is a good solution for some areas. It's not the best solution for others, and same with all of the other housing types. So hopefully room for all of these things at the table this year.
Yeah, and I completely agree. We need to fund both of them, and we also all solutions, but we also need to make sure that the public housing has enough money for maintenance and repair too, which is extremely important since it has not been funded in the past at the rate that it needs to be funded. And going into some housing authorities, I know in Pennsylvania, this is a real issue and a real need.
Excellent, excellent. And I think that's a perfect spot to end today's webinar, and to also let everybody know that the Housing Alliance is working with the National Low Income Housing Coalition on the House campaign that is looking at the full spectrum of resources that we need to grow at the federal level to address our affordable housing crisis. So to reiterate Emily's point and Brian's point, it is not, we should never think about it as an either or, but we need more public housing. We need more housing choice vouchers. We need more low-income housing tax credits to help address and the affordable housing crisis. So just to let you know, immediately after today's webinar, we are going to be sending out an email to all of you, as well as our entire membership, asking for you to sign on to the Housed campaign, the safe, universal, and affordable housing initiative. So if you haven't done so already, please sign on to that initiative, where we will be working with partners all around the country to expand all of the necessary affordable housing resources to ensure that all folks, especially those with low incomes, have a home within reach. And on that note, I want to thank everybody for joining today's webinar. I want to thank our panelists, Emily and Brian, and please be sure to check out our resources on our website. Please be sure to join us on June 10th for our next event, the virtual forum on creating a statewide strategy to prevent eviction. And enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you, everyone.